Good morning. My name is Dr. Joan Viteri, and I am the principal of PS 96, the Richard Rogers School, located in wonderful District 11 in Bronx, New York.
Good morning. My name is Dr. David Preto, and I'm the superintendent of Community School District 20 in Brooklyn.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Josephine Yaboa Van Ness. I am the proud Deputy Superintendent for District 23 in Brownsville, Brooklyn. The title of our research is an investigation of the impact of system leaders, strategic planning, and development to improve instruction and learning.
Good morning, professors, colleagues, and distinguished guests. We hope everyone is doing well this morning, and we are excited to share our research. First, we would like to thank Dr. Steele, who led our POP team, which is comprised of David Preto, Josephine Van Ness, and myself, Joan Viteri. We joined our research in order to conduct an investigation of the impact of system leaders' strategic planning and development to improve instruction and learning. The reason for our work is our dedication to the communities we serve and, most of all, our beautiful students who inspire us to ensure that we, as leaders, honor who they are and who they will become, and that they receive the best education possible. In order to ensure the best possible education for our students and to meet the rigorous demands of the 21st century school system, it requires that leaders strategically consider how they plan and develop capacity, thus our purpose statement. The purpose of this qualitative study was to investigate the impact of system leaders' strategic planning and development in order to improve instruction and learning. The research will specifically explore the professional development needs of millennial principals, the approaches used by newly appointed principals in building their school's capacity through their instructional leadership teams, and instructional leadership regarding remote and blended learning following the COVID-19 pandemic. Our team considered the demands of the 21st century leader and our qualitative approach that focused on the impact of system leaders' strategic planning and development in order to yield high levels of improvement in instruction and learning. Additionally, the increased pressure on overall student performance to meet global demands, including responses to new research in best practices for continued improvement. And of course, the unpredictable crisis impacting systems, which has shifted our educational context in its structure and in fundamental ways. Now, I will hand our presentation over to my colleague Josie to explain our theoretical framework.
Thank you, Joan. Our research was grounded in Hallinger and Murphy's 1986 Instructional Leadership Theoretical Framework. Hallinger and Murphy detail 8 processes that an instructional leader should engage in. They note that it should be framing and communicating school goals, the supervision and evaluation of instruction, coordinating curriculum, developing high academic standards and expectations, monitoring student progress, promoting the professional development of teachers, protecting instructional time, and developing incentives for students and teachers. Our POP team strategic model is grounded in Hallinger and Murphy's 1986 theoretical framework. And our model is called the Instructional Leadership Strategic Planning Model. In order to create a culture of change and to create an environment in which staff and students are safe, learning, and thriving, leaders should consider how they collaborate, plan, and master their contexts. Thus, our literature and research explored the strategic planning of instructional leadership teams, professional development, and crisis management, and its impact on instruction and learning outcomes. I will now pass the floor over to my colleague, David.
Thank you, Josie. Our POP team's research study was grounded in 3 research questions. Question number 1, what methods are implemented by leaders to improve instruction and learning? Question 2, how does the context and circumstances influence system leaders' decision-making for strategic planning? And question 3, what are the implications of school leaders' strategic planning decisions for those they support and lead? These 3 questions guided our team's work in conducting a review of relevant literature and our research in the field. Our literature review explored conceptual and theoretical frameworks with the purpose of providing a foundation for understanding how the categories of instructional leadership teams, professional development, adult learning, and crisis and change leadership inform and support our research findings, conclusions, and recommendations. As our research team's problem of practice centered on matters of instructional leadership and how instructional leadership influences system leaders, our first topic is instructional leadership. Bush and Glover in 2003 advocated for schools to have a vision that promotes direction and change. However, they find that it is of equal importance to support implementing new structures that influence a culture of transformation. Marks and Printing in 2003 times the age of instructional leadership to the 1980s, noting that it was connected to the movement of developing effective schools and required principals to be educational specialists. Bush and Glover in 2003 defined instructional leadership focuses on teaching and learning and on the behavior of teachers in working with students. Leaders' influence is targeted at student learning via teachers. The emphasis is on the direction and impact of influence rather than the influence process itself.
In terms of new principals utilizing their instructional leadership teams, multiple authors agree that instructional leadership teams were formed as a venue to create collaboration in supporting principals and teachers to build school capacity and solve challenges. Also agreed by multiple authors is that school principals are charged with numerous responsibilities, including being actively involved in monitoring the progress of students in their schools. According to Capreo, Bush, Boyntz, and Bowers, who stated that the new instructional leadership team model addresses student problems in learning and teachers' pedagogy. Josie?
Professional development. Researchers agree that effective professional development practices, behaviors, and training are directly connected to student achievement and performance. Elmore 2002 proposes that professional development is distinguished between pre-service education because it occurs after administrators are on the job. Professional development, according to Gusky 2014, can take on various forms, such as seminars, study groups, workshops, conferences, and mentoring. It can also take on innovative structures such as social networking, data engagement teams, and the provisioning of individualized improvement plans. Professional development should be data-driven, goal-oriented, focused on student needs, and move beyond developmentally appealing topics. With consideration to adult learning, there are 4 pillars that should be considered when thinking about promoting the growth and the learning of adults, according to Drago Servicing 2008. Those considerations are teaming, leadership roles, collegial inquiry, and mentoring. According to Lieb and Gilad 2005, professional learning should aim to motivate participants, engaging them in an environment grounded in positive reinforcement and accountability with learning that is transferable. Lieb and Gilad 2005 noted that adult learning should have a role in informing the design of professional development. Authors agree with diversifying professional learning, ensuring that development opportunities are based on people's needs, experience, history, and are tailored to opportunities that are personalized.
With regard to crisis and change leadership, Much in 2015 cited Boyne 2003 in defining crisis leadership as entailing the recognition of emerging threats, initiating efforts to mitigate them, and deal with their consequences, and once the acute crisis period has passed, reestablishing a sense of normalcy. Bridges in 2009 stated that situational change hinges on the new thing, but psychological transition depends on letting go of the old identity you had before the change took place. Cotter, in 1996, described how misaligned structures, personnel, and information systems serve as barriers to empowering employees for broad-based action, and recommended that leaders provide evidence to the organization at large that the sacrifices required in the change effort are worth it. Our research employed a qualitative phenomenological design and included K-12 principal participants located in the Northeast region of the United States. The methods utilized for the selection of participants were two-step snowball sampling and random sampling. The research instrument utilized in the study was an interview protocol created by the researchers and administered to the principal participants. Data collection for the study was drawn from individual qualitative interviews conducted via the Russell Sage Zoom video conference platform and transcribed verbatim using RevTemi software. The data gathered from these interviews was member-checked and analyzed using hand coding for the development of themes that resulted in our individual and collective team findings, conclusions, and recommendations.
During this portion of the presentation, we will present our individual research, highlighting salient points that connect to our POP team's research question. I will present first. My study, entitled Exploring the Approaches Used by New Principals in Building School Capacity Through Their Instructional Leadership Teams. Firstly, Saunders, Doherty, and Weiner agreed. As the role of the modern principals continue to evolve from not only the responsibilities of school improvement within their larger supervisory role, but the duties of the principal now include formulating school goals, evaluation of teachers, and the strong collaboration with teachers in forming various teams that include the instructional leadership teams to enhance pedagogy and create student curriculum that increase overall performance. Then Marshall and Wells agreed that instructional leadership team practices, the leadership skills of principals, and sound relationships between the instructional leadership team and the principals are critical for effective school-based instructional leadership teams. Hence, the purpose of my qualitative phenomenological study was to explore the lived experiences of 16 newly appointed principals in New York State while building capacity through their instructional leadership team. Therefore, through the lens of system leadership, the study identified approaches employed by those new principals and their instructional leadership team to build the capacity and achievement of their schools. I had three overarching questions that grounded my study. The first focused on leadership moves, in which I asked, what approaches are used by new principals in forming an instructional leadership team? Next, I focused on collaborative initiatives, asking what changes were implemented using the instructional leadership team. My third question focused on progress monitoring, asking how do new principals monitor and evaluate if the intended change was achieved using their instructional leadership team. The research question that most connected to our collaborative research was question 2. Our first POP question explored the methods implemented by leaders to improve instruction and learning. The first POP question aligned with the findings of my first research question. What approaches are used by new principals in forming a competent instructional leadership team? The selection process reflected 3 categories. First, 15 out of 16 explained that they took into consideration the leadership experience and overall potential of the participant. Next, 14 out of the 16 used voluntary basis or The third, which was a mixed method approach, meaning that they took into consideration the position of the participant within their school. For example, the school psychologist, the guidance counselor, the special education liaison. Our second POP research question explored how the context and or circumstances influences system leaders' decision making, which aligned with the findings of my second research question. What changes were implemented using the instructional leadership team? All 16 participants believed that their instructional leadership team initiated changes that had various impacts on teachers and students within the school. 16 out of the 16 participants named the impacts that they observed. There were two categories of impacts that arose from the interviews: motivation to try new things, which resulted in pedagogical moves, and teachers shifting from the traditional brick and mortar to a remote platform. The second category was an overall increase in team collaboration as teams needed to depend on each other to share best practices in order to increase student engagement. Our third research question explored the implications of school leaders' strategic planning and decisions for supporting and leading. The findings of this question aligned with my third research question. How do principals monitor and evaluate if the intended change was achieved using their instructional leadership team? This question had two findings in which the second findings most aligned with our POP research. 14 out of the 16 new principals responded that the impact of their instructional leadership team methods would be measured by three different categories, which were student outcomes, surveys, and principal observations. Now I will pass the presentation over to my colleague, Josie.
Thank you, Joan. My research was titled A Phenomenological Study of the Professional Development Needs of Millennial Principals Leading a Multi-Generational Staff. As millennials ascend the workforce and become leaders, researchers agree that appropriate professional development for millennials is necessary. Effective professional development helps to deepen the skills and knowledge of educators, enhancing their leadership capacity and promoting the success of schools. Thus, my phenomenological study explored the experiences of 14 millennial principals in receiving professional development to support the growth of their instructional leadership capacity in order to lead their multi-generational staff within the Northeast region of the US. My study was grounded in three research questions. The first focused on defining professional development, examining how is professional development defined and characterized by millennial principals. The second focused on the exploration of the necessity of professional development, examining what are millennial principal beliefs about the necessity of professional development in building their instructional leadership capacity. And the third focused on professional development opportunities for millennial principals, examining what would be appropriate professional development opportunities for millennial principals in leading a multi-generational staff. Although all my research questions connected to the POP team's research, my third research question had the most significant connection. My research question 1 was, how is professional development defined and characterized by millennial principals? POP research question 1 explores the methods implemented by leaders to improve instruction and learning. There were two findings for research question 1, one of which more specifically aligned to the POP team's research. Finding 1 highlights that 14 of the 14 millennial principals interviewed noted that professional development served as a method that drives the enhancement of their professional practice. Participants noted that professional development served as a method and a resource for professional growth that supported their job-related capacity and efficiency, attainment of goals, and their ability to support their teachers' pedagogical practice. My research question 2 was, what are millennial principal beliefs about the necessity of professional development in building their instructional leadership capacity? Our POP's research question 2 examines how context and/or circumstance really influences systems leaders' decision-making. There were 3 findings for research question 2, 2 of which specifically aligned to the POP team's research. Finding 1 highlighted that 11 of the 14 participants noted that an engaging environment and learning context plays a vital role in learning that supports their instructional leadership capacity. Participants connected engagement to a learning context that is interactive, applicable, and personalized. Contrarily, finding 2 highlighted that 14 of the 14 participants noted at least one issue contributing to their discontentment and disengagement, specifically connected to their learning context, where they thought that the content presented was either general, irrelevant, lacked depth, or the presentation was poor in delivery. My research question 3 was, what would be appropriate professional development opportunities for millennial principals in leading a multi-generational staff? Our POP research question 3 focused on the implications of school leaders' strategic planning decisions. The findings of research question 3 emphasizes the needs of millennial principals for strategic planning. As 14 of the 14 participants highlighted at least one area of focus within their leadership they wanted to be more responsive to. Participants emphasized wanting professional learning specifically focused on communal cultural awareness, having difficult conversations, and on topics that focused on student achievement. I will now pass it over to David.
Thank you, Josie. The title of my research study is The Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on the Instructional Leader. In March 2020, school districts across the country shifted to remote learning in response to the public health concerns caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The shift created a constant state of uncertainty and neutrality for system leaders and school principals. Hallinger and Heck in 1996 stated that impactful principal leadership influences internal school processes that link directly to student learning. Thus, the purpose of this phenomenological qualitative study was to explore and compare the lived experience of principals of elementary, middle, and high schools in the northeastern United States during the COVID-19 pandemic through the lens of instructional leadership. My research study was grounded in 4 research questions. The first focused on the effects of remote and blended learning on the development of the school's instructional program, examining how did principals' experience of remote and blended learning policies impact their instructional leadership. The second question investigated the effects synchronous and asynchronous experiences had on teaching and learning during the COVID-19 pandemic and the shift to remote and blended learning from the perspective of principals, examining what was the impact of synchronous and asynchronous instructional delivery. Questions 3 and 4 investigated the principals' perceived successes and challenges of remote and blended learning, examining what were the most successful aspects of remote and blended learning, and what were the greatest challenges of remote and blended learning. My individual research question that most closely aligned to our POP team research was research question 1. Research question 1 was, how did principals' experience of remote and blended learning policies impact their instructional leadership? Our POP team research question 1 explores the methods implemented by leaders to improve instruction and learning. There were 4 findings for research question 1, 2 of which specifically aligned with our POP team's research. Finding 3 highlighted that 11 of 12 participants described how the shift to remote learning resulted in refinements to the curriculum that required corresponding reduction of lesson placing and prioritizing specified standards. Finding 4 highlighted that 11 of 12 participants shared how changing assessment resources and practices resulted in variation in performance outcomes between remote and blended students, creating concern for the validity of assessment data during the pandemic. My research question 2 was, what was the impact of synchronous and asynchronous instructional delivery? Our POP Team Research Question 2 examines how context and circumstance influences system leaders' decision making. There were 4 findings for Research Question 2, 2 of which specifically aligned to the POP Team's research. Finding 3 highlighted how 6 of 12 participants reported the development of instructional expectations to address the lack of continuity of experience between remote and blended learning for students and teachers. Finding 4 highlighted how 8 of 12 participants reported negative student responses to remote learning based on trauma, age, and inconsistent programming due to hybrid learning, with a complementary positive response to in-person learning for both students and families. Research question 3 was, what were the most successful aspects of remote and blended learning? Our POP Team's research question 3 focused on the implication of school leaders' strategic planning decisions. There were 2 findings for research question 3, one of which specifically aligned with our POP Team's research. Finding 2 highlighted how 9 of 12 principals interviewed reported being close to the full establishment and realization of their vision for student learning in their schools, or described the vision as well established. Research question 4 was, what were the greatest challenges of remote and blended learning? There were 4 findings for research question 4, while none of them specifically and closely aligned to our POP Team's research.
During this next portion of our presentation, we will present our POP Team findings, again highlighting salient points for each of our research studies that directly connect to our POP questions. Each member of the team will present their POP Team findings. I will present first, then my colleagues Josie, followed by my colleague David. The team's findings surrounding our research question 1, which was, what methods are implemented by leaders to improve instruction and learning? Firstly, participants revealed an increase in teacher collaboration and the willingness to try new things, which resulted in new school initiatives, particularly surrounding technology, which were executed through their instructional leadership teams.
Additionally, participants revealed that professional development was used as a tool to support participant professional growth and was used as a resource to improve the pedagogical approaches of the teachers they supervise.
And finally, participants reported identifying priority standards in curriculum refinement, the development of instructional expectations to address the lack of continuity of experience between remote and hybrid learning for students and teachers, and the establishment of their vision for student learning in their schools.
Our team findings surrounding research question 2, which was, how does the context, circumstances influence system leaders' decision-making for strategic planning? Firstly, participants revealed that being both remote and blended created challenges with their school's existing procedures and protocols. Therefore, the impact of the instructional leadership team shifted priorities, enabling the instructional leadership teams to support teachers' learning and collaboratively develop new initiatives surrounding technology.
Secondly, participants revealed that the context in which they learned mattered, reinforcing that they learned best when engaged and disconnected when disengaged. Participants required learning that is applicable, transferable, and relevant to their roles as principals and instructional leaders.
And finally, participants shared how vague and absent policy at the local, state, and federal levels required school leaders to make increased local decisions about basic school contextual features, to integrate technology into pre-pandemic school systems and structures. Principals leading their schools through crisis leveraged existing structures and the urgency created by the crisis to shift practice and mindsets.
And we continue with our team findings for research question 3 that asked, what are the implications of school leaders' strategic planning decisions for those they support and lead? Firstly, new principals measured the impact of their instructional leadership team by student outcomes, surveys, and principal observations.
Millennial principals advocate for tailored professional development that is focused on improving their responsive leadership ability specifically in the areas of communal cultural awareness, difficult conversations, and student achievement.
And finally, participants reported negative student responses to remote learning based on trauma, age, and inconsistent programming due to hybrid learning, with a complementary positive response to in-person learning for both students and their families.
Next is our team's conclusions, which is based on each team member's individual findings. Firstly, new principals would benefit from a systemized approach to collecting, tracking, and measuring the impact of instructional leadership teams. Districts should implement a clear criteria and training on data collecting approaches, which is supported by authors Marshall and Wells, stating instructional leadership teams and the principals are critical for effective school-based instructional leadership teams.
Professional development supports the capacity building of the leaders, helping to develop their ability to lead and support their staff in meeting the needs of students. This is supported by multiple authors' notion that the core purpose of professional development is to ensure that educators can ensure student achievement.
And finally, the absence of and/or shifts in policy restricts the ability of principals to serve in their roles as instructional leader, and the resulting school context met student needs inequitably, with each inequity compounded by embedded inconsistencies in the instructional program delivery over which principals had little control. And this conclusion is supported by the research of Hallinger and Heck, Daegu and Sammons, and Gordon and Calloway, the COVID-19 pandemic educational context through which principal instructional leaders achieved results through indirect means was influenced by myriad factors.
Now our team will present their recommendations for policy. Firstly, systemized approach to collecting, tracking, and measuring the impact of instructional leadership teams. Districts should implement a clear criteria and training on data collecting approaches for new principals.
Centralized data collection and professional learning practices. District and central offices should create a professional learning norm survey to evaluate professional learning preferences and the needs of individual principals, specific schools, and districts in order to curate targeted learning opportunities.
And lawmakers should include principals in the development of policy at the federal, state, and district level. As practitioners in the field and as evidenced in this study, principals had firsthand knowledge of the impact of these policies or lack thereof. As the educational context continues to evolve, policymakers would be wise to leverage the knowledge base and experience of K-12 principals when engaged in policymaking efforts.
Next, our team will present their recommendations for practice. Firstly, specific criteria, selection criteria for instructional leadership team membership should be considered. New principals should consider a multidisciplinary lens so that multiple perspectives are considered prior to the implementation of their instructional leadership team.
Opportunities for autonomous professional inquiry and learning. Connected to adult learning pillars, opportunities for autonomous learning should be strategically planned for by central, district, and school leaders. Scheduling time for educator-to-educator processing of information, questioning, and collaboration will allow leaders to engage in authentic dialogue, inquiry, learning, and planning.
And finally, educational technology integration and professional development. Practitioners should pursue meaningful integration of technology rather than complete shift through professional learning for teachers and parent training. System leaders need to capitalize on the increased capacity of teachers to engage students in meaningful and innovative learning that focuses on production, not consumption. And finally, our team's recommendations for future research. Recommendation 1, expand the scope of this study by engaging a greater population of leaders. This research could evolve into a mixed method study utilizing quantitative methods such as surveys and questionnaires. This would allow robust data collection and provide comprehensive results. Recommendation 2, future research is needed to determine the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on specific student subgroups, including but not limited to multilingual learners, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, children of different age groups, as well as new principals and their development as instructional leaders. And finally, specific instructional practices that were successful in remote learning and the digitized educational context.
We conclude our presentation with the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The success of our schools depends on our strategic planning, but more importantly, our collective efforts and genius. May we continue to be leaders that work together to create a culture of positive change. This slide provides the QR code for our research bifold, which you may use your camera to hover over to learn more about our collective research. Please click View in PDF, which will bring you to the entire bifold. I will pause for a moment for you all to do so now. This is our contact information should you want to learn more about our collective study or individual research. Our names and emails are listed. And are there any questions?